Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to go ahead and do my April reading wrap up. So I'm going to dive right in and let you guys know what I read through in April and a little bit about what I thought about it. I do want to warn you, this was not a fabulous reading month for me. I was able to read a lot more than I was in March. In March, I got toward a really big reading slump toward like the middle and end of the month. I guess just because that's when in my state we started heading toward quarantine and I had a lot of emotions. So I got out of the reading slump in April, which is good, but I don't know if I'm just in a mood from having been in quarantine now for almost 2 months. But I didn't love a lot of the books. So I'm going to try to be as positive as possible, but just know this month I didn't love everything that I read this month. I have a lot of things to say, actually. So anyway, I'm going to jump on in. The first book that I read this month was Get Out of Your Own Way by Dave Hollis. And if you're not familiar with the Hollis Company, Rachel Hollis is the author of Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing, which are both really popular books. And she is also the founder of the Hollis Company, which is a big media company at this point. So Dave is her husband and he wrote this book. I got a free copy from NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. So I picked it up, I read it, and I just kind of wanted to see Dave's opinion. I ended up giving it, I think, 3 stars on Goodreads just because it really felt like Girl Wash Your Face all over again, but from Dave's perspective. And I'm not totally sure that it's even fair to knock it down to 3 stars because of that. Because if it hadn't been close to what his wife was saying in her books, then I would have been frustrated by that. But I wanted a little bit more than kind of just a rehash of Girl Wash Your Face. Also, I think he's sort of trying to get at like husbands and dads, the men. And most of his readers seem to be women who are big fans of his wife. So he doesn't really seem to be forming his own audience either. So I didn't love it, but the copy was free and I mean, it's a fine book if you want to go read it. It's fine. It's just, if you read Girl Wash Your Face, it's kind of a rehash. The next book that I read this month was The Gracie R by Kim Liggett, and I really, really enjoyed it overall. I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads. I loved it. Fascinated me. The world building was great. The story was interesting. It kept me turning pages. There were twists. There was a lot of, it did get kind of like morbid and there were some like details in there that were really kind of like gory and graphic, but in the world that it was in and in the subject matter that it was talking about, it needed to be that way. I kept turning the pages. I loved the message that was in it about how women are often more likely to tear each other down than to help each other and would kind of rather just everybody go down than rally around each other and get through things together and how dangerous that can ultimately be. And I just thought that was such a good message to have. I expected this to have a little bit more of a girl power ending, and I didn't get that. I don't want to give spoilers, but I thought the ending was really disappointing. I read The Gracie R for my online book club that I have every month, and a lot of the people in the book club, not everybody, but a lot of the people thought that the ending was great and that it was fitting and that it was necessary. I felt like none of the characters deserved what they got at the end of the book. And there's potential that there's going to be a sequel. But again, the way that it ended, I felt like if there's going to be a sequel, it didn't need to end that way, and maybe it shouldn't have. And I guess I just wanted more from the ending. And I really liked the book, but at the same time, like, if it does become a series, I will like it better as a series than I did as a standalone. So it was kind of like, this was a really great book, but I wanted a little bit more from it. So I didn't give it the 5 stars, but it's a great read. Definitely would recommend. The next book that I read for this month was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and it's very full of scandal, full of kind of old Hollywood glamour, but at the same time showing a lot of problems that came with being a working woman and a woman in Hollywood during the time period. Think Marilyn Monroe, Audrey Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, that kind of thing. And it speaks to a lot of the sexism and just kind of the way that women had to go, you know, around Robin Hood's barn, I guess, to get anything done during that time period. There were some plot twists that I didn't expect. I thought the overall storyline went places I didn't expect it to go. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but, well, I don't want to get spoilers, so that's all I'm going to say. But it definitely kept me reading until the end, and I liked the story overall. So that was another 4-star book from me. Then I got into the Reading Rush readathon and had several books that I read for that. I already did a video detailing the prompts, the books I picked, and a little bit of a reading vlog for that. So I don't want to go into too much detail for these, but I'll go ahead and include them real quick. The first one was The Unexpected Everything by Morgan Matson. And it's a 500-page book with pages that are, with chapters that are like 25 to 30 pages long. So it's kind of hard to get through. It's also really kind of nothing special. I felt like a lot of the dialogue was forced. I felt like there were a lot of teenage YA storyline cliches that happened. And so I didn't love it. I gave it 2 or 3 stars. I can't remember. But it's an okay book. If you're looking for something like light and fluffy that's going to make you feel good in the end, this is definitely one you can go to, but make sure you have a significant amount of time because, like I said, 500-ish pages and 25 to 30 page chapters. It's quite the tome. The next book I read for the readathon was The World's Last Night by C.S. Lewis. This is a collection of his essays. This was a 5-star book from me, which is significant this month, but also C.S. Lewis pretty much always gets 5 stars from me, so I'm not really sure that's fair. I'm highly biased when it comes to C.S. Lewis, but The World's Last Night is great. Also, I love this cover. I think it's beautiful, and it's a short read. It's only 122 pages. I enjoyed it. The last book that I read for the readathon was Under the Tuscan Sun by Frances Mays. And it's about a woman and her husband who buy a kind of decrepit old villa in Tuscany and restore it and kind of turn it into their summer home. And it's just really kind of cool with a lot of stories about the restoration and all the hoops that they have to jump through with like the Italian government and working with contractors in Italy and the differences in culture. They're learning how to shop like Italians and cook like Italians and garden like Italians. It's really cool. Definitely slow paced. I didn't think it was boring because, like I said, I've always wanted to go to Italy and I really enjoyed learning about it this way, but I would not read this for a readathon. If I had to do it over, I would just read it in general and maybe take like a chapter or two a day so that it didn't start to feel boring. It's not boring, but it's slow paced. So I think it would have been better if I had read it at a slower pace. This was another 4-star book for me. After the readathon was over, I picked up The Paris Hours by Alex George. This book I have very mixed feelings about, and I honestly can't even remember what I gave it on Goodreads. It's either like a 2-star book or a 5-star book. There's not even an in-between. It's kind of brilliantly done, but that's also part of what made it frustrating for me to read. In the beginning, you start out, there's all these characters, you're moving around from character to character, you're hardly ever having the same character in the next chapter, you're jumping around, and there's dual timelines for almost all of them. So you're jumping back and forth between Paris in the 1920s and not even necessarily Paris, somewhere in Europe during World War I. And so you keep jumping back and forth with dual timelines for like 5 or 6 characters. And that's just a lot to try to keep track of. It was really interesting. I liked all the stories. They gradually start to come together toward the middle of the book. It starts to become less work to keep track of. And in the end, they all end up in the same place and the same time. It reminds me of a jazz composition. You start out with all these individual instruments playing, and then they all kind of come together in this big, like, cacophony of sound. And I feel like that's sort of what the author was trying to do here, and it's genius. But it's also really confusing. So I don't know what to tell you about this one. Either you'll love it or you'll hate it. I'm not sure how I feel about it at all, but it was interesting. I'll give it that. It was interesting. The next book that I read this month was A Good Neighborhood by Therese Ann Fowler. I really enjoyed this book, but it's definitely very hard-hitting. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I'd kind of maybe compare this storyline to Romeo and Juliet, but it's dealing with racism and the inequalities in our justice system and in our society. So it's hard to read, and parts of it are really sad and parts of it make you really angry. Like I said, overall, really good. I gave it 5 stars, but hard to read. So just know that going in, it's difficult. It's good, and I feel like more of these stories need to be out there in the world, but it's hard emotionally to read. The last book that I read for April was Evvie Drake Starts Over. This surprised me, and part of it is just my own failings as a reader. I don't love going into a book knowing a lot about it. I like to be surprised. And oftentimes I won't even read the full synopsis because, again, I like to be surprised, and sometimes I feel like the synopsis gives too much away. But the synopsis of this book starts out with Evvie Drake being recently widowed. And so I thought this was going to be kind of like along the lines of A Man Called Ove and end up being like more of a mother-son relationship between Evvie and Dean. That's the name of the baseball player. And it's not, because Evvie is like in her early 30s and it's a romance. So it wasn't what I expected, but part of that was on me for incorrectly thinking only about widows as older women and not going into the book thinking of that as a possibility. It got clarified pretty early on in the book, but I still didn't really expect it to become a romance, and that's what it is. If you are Not looking for spoilers, I'm gonna say turn this part off because I'm about to go into spoilers, just because I have some things to say. Evvie was not in a happy marriage. She was not happy with her husband. In the beginning of the book, she's starting out leaving him, and then she gets the call that he's been in an accident, and then ultimately he ends up passing away. She's leaving him because he is emotionally and psychologically abusive. That's a hard topic, and I didn't feel like this book handled that really well. I thought it got treated kind of lightly, and maybe that wasn't really the author's intent, because there were parts of it where Evvie was trying to downplay it and saying, well, you know, he wasn't hitting me, so can I really call that abuse? And that's a really common thing in survivors of abuse that isn't physical. But it's still a really heavy topic, and I didn't feel like it got treated seriously enough. And it's almost at the end by the time Evvie finally seeks help from a mental health professional, and by that time she's already romantically involved with somebody, and it's just getting into a relationship is a bad way to try to solve your issues. And I say that as somebody who has been in emotionally and psychologically abusive relationships before. So I didn't appreciate that about the book, but at the same time, it was kind of the lighter romance that I needed, and I did enjoy the romance. So my feelings about the books are kind of mixed. I ended up giving it 3 stars, and in my review, I talked about why I had some problems with it. This month, I didn't get to The Girl with the Louding Voice by Evvie Dare, or Dare. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I actually did look it up, and I can't find anything. But I didn't get to this month, mostly because when I finished A Good Neighborhood, I was almost toward the end of the month, and A Good Neighborhood was so hard-hitting, and I knew that this was going to be hard-hitting, and I didn't want to read 2 hard-hitting books in a row. I didn't feel like I was emotionally in a place to handle that with everything going on. So I am moving this over into May. Stay tuned to this channel because I'm going to be finalizing the rest of my May TBR and showing you guys what's on that pretty soon. And I hope you'll join me for that. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.